Alright guys, we're going to start out by taking this stick and trying to turn it into a plank. Basically just knock two round edges off of this so we have like a flat piece of wood. Then we'll take out those hatchet marks with a draw knife, or in my case an old planer blade, and this will just give us a cleaner surface. Then we'll sketch out our design, and in my case I just followed the grain of the wood. I figured it'd be stronger that way, and because this paddle is made out of a stick, I might as well make it look like it was made out of a stick. And then I'll make some relief cuts going down to my stencil line with a coping saw and knock those chunks out of there with a chisel and a hammer. And I found this was the most effective or the quickest way to get rid of material. Then I'll use a hand plane to flatten out the ends of the paddle where the blade will be, as well as the handle. And I want to make sure that the planes are at least kind of flat so I can have a decent glue up later on down the line. And to round out the shaft of the paddle, I started off with a wood rasp, but that just got clogged up really easily. Wasn't working that well for me, so I switched over to a utility knife, and that gave me a little bit cleaner surface, and it also took off material quicker than the wood rasp, so would recommend. Then we'll start working on the blade of the paddle. I have two pieces of sycamore that I milled up about a year ago, and I'm going to clean up one side, make sure it's nice and flat so that I can glue it onto my paddle. So after a little bit more prep, I smeared some glue all over the paddle as well as the blade, stuck it together, and I'll be honest with you guys, clamping this was just god awful. Like, there aren't any parallel lines or anything. Yeah, there's no good way to do this, but we got her done. And I figured while I had the chance, I might as well screw one side of the blade into the paddle, make sure at least one side's strong, and I wouldn't be able to do that with the other part of the blade, so yeah, just glued it on there and prayed. If I thought the first glue up was difficult, this was even worse. I mean, just look at that angle. It was not fun at all. But I think maybe it gave it more of like a concave paddle shape in the end. I don't know. Then we'll cut up some wood for our handle. No idea what kind of wood this is. It is fairly soft, but I think it's hard enough for a handle of a paddle. I glued both those pieces on either side of the handle, let it dry, and then roughed it out to shape later on in the video. And to buff out those knife marks from earlier, I found that using this shoe shine method with an old sanding belt worked pretty well. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the paddle, I still had a lot of excess wood that didn't need to be there, so I knocked it off with a hammer and a chisel. And then we'll start making this look a lot more like a paddle. Then we'll leach out a bunch of testosterone on this handle, and once it's to a rough shape, I'll clean it up with a file and some sandpaper. And I cleaned up this little radius with a hook knife that I made, and if you want to see how I made that knife, you can click in the top right hand corner. And after a lot more sanding, I think it was about 4 coats of polyurethane on our paddle. I only put it on the lower half because I read in some YouTube comments an old guy said that you should only put polyurethane on the bottom half because you'll get blisters if it's on the handle. I don't know if that's true, but I figured he's old and he probably knows what he's talking about. I went with some mineral oil on the handle, or the top half of the paddle, and that's pretty much it. Let's rub some oil all over our shaft and get this video rated PG-13 and move into pictures.